ready to start. So first, thanks, Harry, for inviting me here. It's great to be here and see so much people here. And very much thanks to Rune for your previous presentation. I have a background in anthropology myself, and I really enjoyed your kind of theoretical framework on explaining the customs related to the politics and religion. So that's a very good starting point for me, and I'm grateful to you. That's great. So what I'm going to speak now is much about the human rights situation in Xinjiang, which all of you are very familiar to. But I'm also saying a few things about what Amnesty International does in its campaigning. But first, just a few words on what is Amnesty International. It is a worldwide human rights movement. We have about 7 million supporters in about 150 countries. In Finland we have a section, and there are about 50 sections around the world working in different countries. We have about 40,000 supporters in Finland. And Amnesty has headquarters. We have our international secretariat basically in London and 15 other offices around the world, including Hong Kong, which is the home for our China team. So everything related to Xinjiang is also led from the Hong Kong office. The goal of Amnesty's work is that everybody in the world can enjoy universal human rights. And we do research, not so much in the section, but the International Secretariat does research. We have research teams now in different countries. We research human rights violations, and we work to prevent and eradicate them. And Amnesty does media work, we do campaigning, we do advocacy work, and it's all based on our own research, basically. And everything that Amnesty does as a human rights organization is based on international law, human rights norms, and that all is defined in international conventions and other documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also humanitarian law. And something I have to say here is that Amnesty International doesn't take any position on any group's cause of independence, but it remains determined to defend the right to freedom of expression. So, Amnesty has been reporting on human rights violations in Xinjiang for at least 30 years. In 1989, there was a national crackdown of all human rights in China, and also the tightening of party control, and it also affected Xinjiang in a way. As you say, there was a relatively more loose period in the 80s, but after that it got worse. And from the beginning of the 90s, human rights violations were often linked to peaceful protests or violent clashes, including a few terrorist acts that happened in Xinjiang and other places in China. And included violent disruption of protests. There were people killed and ill-treated. We have seen extrajudicial executions. That means people are shot on the streets in the demonstrations, for instance. We have seen enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, unfair trials leading to long prison sentences and death penalty. And occasionally there have been several strike hard campaigns. I think you referred to those as well, which means kind of campaign campaign of crackdown basically, and more police control and so on. And all the time we have seen human rights violations linked to peaceful expression of views. We have prisoners of conscience who are only imprisoned for their peaceful expression of their views. And then, of course, there's strong discrimination, a human rights violation. There's discrimination for the language, especially teaching of the Uyghur language. also culture and religious practice, which Rune very, very detailed, which he explained in a detailed way. And then we have seen escalation of human rights violations, especially maybe from the human rights perspective after the 9/11 in 2001 terrorist attacks in New York, which led to the global war on terror kind of phenomenon, which eroded human rights globally, not only in the USA, not only in specific places, but globally. That also fueled Islamophobic ideas. Oh goodness, I have both languages there, don't I? But for China, it was a pretext to deepen its crackdown against predominantly Muslim ethnic minorities. And in many countries, they started to use anti-terrorism legislation to attack human rights, including China.